Okay. What do you have to say for yourself?
See you soon.
That you received. Mary Beth Bonacci is among the first Catholic speakers to introduce audiences to St. John Paul II's theology of the body. She is the founder of Real Love, Inc., an organization dedicated to promoting respect for God's gift of human sexuality. She's written a book, well, more than one book, Real Love, based on the theology of the body. She's the author of We're on a Mission from God. She writes a monthly column for Catholic newspapers, contributes regularly to the Catholic Match Institute blog. And her educational video, Sex and Love, What's a Teenager to Do, was awarded the Crown Award for Best Youth Curriculum. She spoke at World Youth Day in Denver, 75,000 people. A little bit smaller crowd at the venue because she was in St. Louis in 1999 when John Paul II came to St. Louis. She spoke to about 22,000 kids there. That was at the hockey arena, I think.
Yeah, TWA. Yeah.
Well, no, that was football. Anyway.
Oh, was it? I just remember TWA.
That was where the Pope said Mass, but I think he spoke at the hockey.
Because it was something that was enclosed. I remember that.
Oh, yeah, it was enclosed. We wouldn't be jumping.
Yeah.
So anyway, one last thing, just to give you an idea of Mary Beth's also her academic credentials. She has a bachelor's degree in communications from the University of San Francisco, a master's degree in theology of marriage and family from the John Paul II Institute, and an honorary doctorate from Franciscan University of Steubenville. Mary Beth, if you want to say anything more about yourself, I'll leave that up to you, but I'm very happy to introduce Mary Beth Bonacci.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, very much. All right, I get all set up here. There we go. See, I gotta be able. Oh, look at I can see the time on there. That helps. Nah. Anybody object if I take this off? I'm Italian, and keeping one hand grounded helps me very much. Hi there. Happy Humane Vitae anniversary. Have you been celebrating it? Just all the parties, the parades, the school closings. It just gets so tiring. Did you see the Hollywood All-Star tribute to Pope Paul VI? Yeah, fabulous, right? Yeah, okay, maybe not. As a church, we're having a little celebration, but the wider culture seems largely unaware of it. I went to a doctor yesterday. I was having throat trouble. I said, I got to give a talk tomorrow night. He said, what do you speak on? I was like, I'm a Catholic speaker. I'm giving a talk on the 50th anniversary of Humane Vitae. And he just went, okay, whatever. Excuse me. It's a shame. Should have listened a little more to Paul VI. Right? We wouldn't have a Me Too movement today. If we'd listened to Paul VI, he warned us. He warned us if we continue down the path we're on, women will not be respected. I don't think even he imagined how bad it would get. I don't think even he imagined a Harvey Weinstein. But it all came true, and then some. But the thing is, they didn't listen back then either. They were exciting times, right? I mean, I was 5 years old. My recollection's a little thin, but I know enough about the time to know that this was like the apex of the sexual revolution, right? 67 was the summer of love. It's the flowered power in San Francisco, and like they've got this new birth control pill, so everybody can be sexually free, and it's going to be awesome, and there won't be pregnancies, so everybody can just love everybody. And we have our love-ins, and it's all great because technology is going to save us. And it was a great era. Technology was going to save us from everything anyway. I mean, it was the era of technology. We're going to the moon. Everybody's drinking Tang. On every level, the sky is the limit because technology is releasing us from the shackles of our limits. Whether it's our earthly limits, our biological limits. This is it, and the whole culture is swimming in it. I mean, the movies are starting to push the envelope, right? You've got The Graduate, right? What was that? That was like 69. That was like the next year. Everything, literature, music, all of a sudden there's all this psychedelic rock music. They're singing about sex like more openly than in the 50s when they just pretended it was about something else, but it was really like rock around the clock. And so like there's this whole huge cultural explosion, right? And we have this little 23-page booklet of theological language. Please don't use birth control. It's not good for you. It's going to cause trouble. Hello, hello. Not likely to influence the generation of love, right? They were not passing these around at Woodstock. Ooh, wow. That's heavy, man. Outside the church, probably nobody even knew about it. Inside the church, it was like a bomb went off. And I mean, some of you may actually recall this. Like I said, I was 5. So, I did come out of my room and say, Mom and Dad, did Paul VI allow birth control? No, I did not. There was widespread expectation that the teaching would be reversed. Or if not reversed, that they would come to the conclusion that the pill did not count under the teaching. People thought that, well, maybe not. I mean, they formed a commission. They're looking at all this stuff because, well, every other method of birth control somehow interrupted the act, right? Condoms or spermicides or whatever, they interrupted it. The pill didn't interrupt anything. It just changed the woman's biology. So people were saying, well, it's not an interruption, so maybe it doesn't even count. We can eat, right? Please, we can use this pill, right? We like this pill. So John the 23rd formed a commission to advise him on this. And then he died. And then Paul VI inherited this commission. Initially, the commission was just intended to advise the Pope on how to promulgate the Church's teaching on contraception. But somehow over the course of it, somebody decided that their job was to advise the Pope on what the teaching should be. And so the commission kind of broke down into a majority and a minority. And this majority report, a majority of the commission members wrote this extensive report advising the Holy Father to change the teachings. And surprise, surprise, the majority report got leaked to the press. In the States through the National Catholic Reporter. So, of course it's going to be reversed. These people who are supposed to advise him are advising him to. So, yeah, it's all that's left is for Pope Paul to put his name on it. Well, instead they got 23 pages of nope. 23 pages of reasserting consistent church teaching. People were shocked. Pastors had already been advising couples in anticipation of the reversal. I know my own mother was told it was okay to use the birth control pill if it was to regulate her cycle. So people were hearing from people in callers that this was going to be okay. And then you get high-profile priests who are publicly breaking with the church over this, who are publicly dissenting. And this was really unheard of on a large scale before Humanae Vitae. Priests didn't publicly dissent. Priests didn't stand in front of microphones and huge numbers of people and say, I disagree with the church on this, I break with the church on this. But they were vocal in their dissent. And so you've got these people in the pews who are saying, well, first of all, the pastor told me it's okay to use birth control. And second, I just saw Father Curran on TV, and he was saying he doesn't agree. So there are callers that say this and callers that say that. I'm going with these callers. I feel pretty good about this because, we've been taught to trust our priests, and this is what our priests are saying. Callers seem to agree with me. So there was rebellion in the pews on an unprecedented scale. Catholics just said, yeah, no, we're not gonna. And this went on. So into the 70s, and then another pope came along. And he had actually been behind the scenes during all of this, during Humanae Vitae. We tend to think, well, Pope Paul VI was in the 60s and John Paul II was in the late 70s, so he wasn't really around for that stuff. He was around for that stuff. He actually served on the commission that was advising the Holy Father. However, he was a Cardinal Archbishop of a communist country, and the communists wouldn't let him go to travel to Rome for the meetings. So he stayed in Poland cooling his heels, but they were sending him the reports. So he got the majority report. So he formed his own commission in Poland. And they ripped the majority report apart and wrote something called the Krakow document that was a response to the majority report that heavily influenced Humanae Vitae. Some people say that it's a better document than Humanae Vitae, but I read it, I didn't necessarily, it's just different. So, he's watching, and he was also heavily involved in Vatican II, and in drafting many of the documents of Vatican II, particularly Gaudium et Spes, which discusses these very issues around contraception and marriage, and the ends and meanings of marriage. So he's been thinking through this stuff for a long time. And as he's being Cardinal Archbishop in Poland, he's writing these reflections on what he called his adequate anthropology. He'd written a book called Love and Responsibility in the 1950s, early 1960s, which was a philosophical treatise on sex. It's the best book you'll ever read once you can get past the fact that it's really hard to read. The first chapter is an analysis of the verb to use. And by the time you're done with it, you just want to hurt yourself. But then the second chapter starts to talk about sex, and that makes it more interesting. So there you go. So he started writing a theological counterpart to this philosophical treatise, which he called his Theology of the Body. Because he was involved in the whole Humanae Vitae thing, he was watching the explosion afterwards, he's seeing everything that's going on, and he's saying, we need a foundation. We need what he called an adequate anthropology. We need an adequate understanding of man as male and female, an adequate anthropology to kind of undergird the church's teaching. And so he's about to publish this as a book when he becomes Pope. And, they say God's timing is perfect. It must be, but if I was advising God, I would have done this backwards. Because you've got this, and then you've got this. Right? This is the conclusion. This makes the case. This is the argument. This is the explanation. This had no shot because it was 23 brief pages of an obscure church document no one was going to read. And it was conclusions from natural law. Beautiful if you understand everything, but it was natural law doesn't allow it. To which the generation of the 60s said, oh yeah, watch us. We needed this to come before this. Because this would make a lot more sense if we had all the background that came in this. So, tonight, and John Paul II, I think, even agreed, because the very last section of this book, this is the Wednesday audiences, the very last section of his Theology of the Body is entitled Reflections on Humanae Vitae. So he knew that it took all of the theology of the body to make a case at the end for humane vitae. So tonight, let's redo history. Let's just flip the order. Let's do the theology of the body first and look at how it leads up to humane vitae, which happened. What do they call that? Is that deductive, where you start with a conclusion? Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I had a 50-50 shot. Okay, so John Paul II, Carol Wojtyła, believed that what the church was lacking was an adequate anthropology, an adequate understanding of man as male and female, as created in the image and likeness of God, not as kidney and liver and spleen, but as male and female and as created in the image and likeness of God. And it was hard to promulgate the teachings on sexuality because we lacked this adequate understanding of man as male and female as created by God. And he said that the study of the physical leads us to the spiritual. That just like studying a painting, you learn about the artist, so studying the creature, we learn about the creator. Studying man and woman tells us something about the God who created us. Sorry, I'm just like, this is where they just like throw them. I kind of want to just throw them. If man is God's highest creature, then in studying him, we can learn about God. And by man, are we clear that we mean male and female? I had a friend who was working at a parish once and got in the middle of an argument between the pastor and a nun. And the nun was saying, "I'm sorry, Father, if you say man, I just don't believe it includes me." And he said, "Sister, if I told you there was a man-eating tiger outside, would you feel safe?" So by man, we mean male and female. The primary concept here is that the body is important. We are not Gnostics. There are certain philosophies like Gnosticism that say spirit good, body bad. That is not Catholicism. That is not our faith. The body is us in this life. We are our body. We are embodied souls or ensouled bodies. Take your pick. When I interact with you, I am interacting with you, with your body, with your face, the body matters, and what we do with the body matters. All of our experience is mediated through the body. You're hearing me now through your ear canals, through your eardrums. You're seeing me through your eyeballs. When we look at a living body, it's different than looking at a corpse. The body isn't animated with the soul. It is us. Life happens through the body. Christ took a body. What could that possibly say about the body except that it's good, that it carries a tremendous, tremendous dignity? And so John Paul II said the study of the physical leads to the spiritual, and the study of sexual attraction leads to the spiritual. That because God created it, and he created it to be what he works through to perform his most creative act, to his identity, his core identity as creator happens through sexual attraction, sexual activity, makes it a valid point of study. So, he goes back to the Genesis account of creation. You've all read that, right? On weekends, you're not doing anything else. Remember how God created the sun and the moon and it was good? The day and the night and it was good? The blah and the blah and it was good? The blah and the blah and it was good? And then he created Adam and it was very good. How come everything else is just normal good, but Adam is very good? The Genesis author just get tired of writing it that way and wanted to mix things up a little bit. Adam is fundamentally different from the rest of creation. Adam is created. Do you remember how Adam was created? God molded him from the clay and then breathed into him. He's created of the earth, but he has the breath, he has the life of God in him. He carries God's image and likeness, God's life. Adam is us. When we study the book of Genesis, we're not just studying this one guy who lived a long time ago. We're studying the creation of man, the creation of us. When we look at the relationship between God and Adam and Eve, it's the relationship between God and mankind. So, there's a quote in the Vatican II document, Gaudium et Spes, which pretty much sums up everything John Paul II is going to do from here on out. And that is Gaudium et Spes 24, which, again, you all read on weekend nights when you're not reading Genesis. Pull down Gaudium et Spes, honey. Haven't read that in a while. Gaudium et Spes 24. Man, being the only creature created for his own sake, finds himself only in a sincere gift of himself. 2 parts. And this sums up pretty much all of John Paul II's thought. This really pretty much sums up a good part of the Christian life. Man, being the only creature created for his own sake, finds himself only in a sincere gift of himself. Okay, Genesis. God creates Adam. Why? Does God need Adam? No. God needs nothing, you know, what with being God and all. He creates Adam because he loves Adam. He creates Adam not for God's sake, but for his own sake. Because he wants Adam to exist. He loves Adam. He wants Adam to have life. He wants Adam to have life with him forever. Adam is created for his own sake. Again, this is not just about Adam. This is about us. You were created for your own sake. Not for the sake of your spouse, not for the sake of your kids, not for the sake of your parents, not for the sake of your brothers and sisters, not for the sake of your congregation. You were created for your own sake. Because God got the idea of you in his brain and wanted you to exist. Married couples, each person in the married couple was created for his or her own sake. This is key to understanding sexual morality, key to understanding humanae vitae. This couple consists of 2 people, each loved madly by God for their own sake. Created and loved by God. Period. So, at this point, there's only one person, right? There's only Adam. And what's the first thing God says? It is not good for man to be alone. Well, why not? I mean, Adam's got a pretty sweet deal. Adam has dominion over the earth, dominion over all the animals. Adam has significant real estate holdings. He's got nobody to bug him. I mean, you'd think Adam would have it great, but no. He's not satisfied. Because Adam doesn't find fulfillment in dominion, in real estate. Adam finds fulfillment in love. Gaudium et Spes 24. Man, being the only creature created for his own sake, finds himself only in a sincere gift of himself. Adam finds himself in love, in loving another person. And in naming the animals, he realizes that there's no one else like him. He is fundamentally different from the rest of creation. What he wants, he can't find in creation. He doesn't just want a sexual partner or a physical partner. He wants a deeper spiritual union. He wants someone to give himself to. And so John Paul II says that Adam waited on the gift. Because Adam himself could not make it happen. Adam couldn't make this person appear. Those of us who are single get that. We can't make it happen. We want to, we try, but you can't. You want to just build the right one, but it doesn't work that way. Badly as you want it, can't make it happen. That's the second half of Gaudium et Spes. He finds himself only a sincere gift of himself. Whatever we think is going to make us happy doesn't make us happy if we're not loving. So Adam searches and God finally delivers, right? He goes to sleep and God takes a rib. What does that say? That God takes a rib out of Adam. That Eve is created of the same stuff as Adam. Also created in the image and likeness of God for her own sake. Eve is created for her own sake, not for the sake of Adam. And some people say, well, I don't know about that, because read the whole passage. It says it is not good for man to be alone. I will create a helper fit for him. Right? Helper. Administrative assistant. Right? God created you to help me, woman, so come on and help. It's a nice try. The problem is that that word that we translate as helper, apparently helper is not an exact translation. And if you've ever done any work with linguistics, you know that there will be a word in one language that doesn't have an exact translation in another language. Like the Eskimos have, 47 words for snow? And in Colorado we only have 2, and one of them's an expletive. So there is some word for snow in Eskimo that we can't translate exactly. We just have to kind of approximate. Well, it's that kind of snow where it's not exactly coming down, but it's not exactly sideways, and when it lands, but we can't do it all the way. So same with this word helper. They say that helper is a word that's close. They say another word that would be close would be savior. I like savior. Not for the reason you're thinking. Dun, dun, dun. I'm here to save you. You are too stupid to be left alone. That's not it. It's that in a very real way, Eve is savior for Adam, because before the appearance of Eve, Adam can't do that which he's created to do, which is to love. He's created to give himself in love, and before the appearance of Eve, he is unable to do that. So it is the appearance of Eve that makes that possible. So in the same way, Adam is savior to Eve, because without Adam, Eve would not be able to do what she's created to do, which is to love. So they're created for their own sake, but given to each other to love each other. And Adam sees that. He says, this at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This at last is someone I can love. This at last is someone I can give myself to. And he sees her and thinks, she's created in the image and likeness of God. Oh my gosh. He is madly in love with her. She's so precious. She has this incredible dignity. God loves her. And all Adam wants to do is the same thing God would do, is to love her, is to look out for what's absolutely best for her. Now, I'm assuming that Adam noticed pretty immediately that there were certain differences. The physical differences, I would assume, were very apparent. Emotional differences may have taken a little longer. Like the first time they had a fight or a problem. Because what does Eve do when she has a problem? She talks about her problem, right? To as many people as possible, which in Eden means Adam. What does Adam do when he has a problem? He goes in his cave and closes the door, if indeed it has a door, and he thinks about his problem. What does Eve do? She knocks on the door of the cave. Let me in! Don't shut me out! I can help you! Please talk to me! And Adam's thinking, now I have 2 problems. Male and female are 2 completely different ways of being human. Not just 2 kind of different, interesting blueprints, not just the same basic thing with a few variations. Down to every cell, male and female are completely different. Our brains are different. They didn't know this for a long time. Because when they were studying brains, how do you study brain? What do you want? You want a brain that's healthy yet dead, right? Well, where's the greatest supply of healthy yet dead brains that any civilization is going to find? On the battlefield, right? There's a cannonball hole in the stomach, but we don't care about that. We're looking at the brain. So they thought that the male brain was kind of the standard. They thought that's what all brains look like. Well, then they start looking at female brains wow, this is different. Then, I'm not a medical professional, so I apologize in advance to any of you who are, but here's my 35,000 foot level description of the brain difference. You know how we each have a right brain and a left brain? Using mine as an example. And they're connected by what's called the corpus callosum. Well, apparently, men have a very small corpus callosum, whereas women have a large corpus callosum. And women are thinking, it's good to have a big corpus callosum, right? It is neither good nor bad, it just is. But the difference is lots of information can go back and forth on that big corpus callosum. Right? Oh, this is not theology of the body, incidentally. It's my extrapolation thereof. Men have a teeny tiny little corpus callosum, so like information can't get through as easy. So the way I describe it is your feelings are on one side and what you're doing is on the other side. And for men, they can do what they're doing without their feelings giving them a whole lot of trouble. But for women, our feelings are always poking through that big superhighway of a corpus callosum saying, what you doing? Want to know how you're feeling? I can tell you. Over and over and over. They say that this is what explains women's intuition. That we can reach into nonverbal parts of our brains and know things that we can't explain why we know them, because it's from the nonverbal side that can't explain stuff. They show men and women pictures of faces with expressions on them, and they ask, how's this person feeling? And the women say, he's happy, he's sad, she's perplexed, he's flummoxed. And when they do the same studies, they ask men, and the men are like, he's fine. He's fine. She's fine. That one might be hungry. Just saying. Male and female are fundamentally different. And these differences come into play in parenting. When a woman needs to be able to read the expression on a face without verbal cues. And where a man who's protecting a wife and a newborn child and getting food or shooting whatever, threats, can't be walking around saying, we had a fight, right? It is all very primal, but we're very different. And so Adam and Eve see each other. Adam says, this at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. And because they are in Eden, they love each other perfectly. John Paul II said that the ethos and the ethic were one in Eden. The ethos is what we are inclined to do. Yes. And the ethic is what we're supposed to do. So the ethos, what they were inclined to do and what they were supposed to do were exactly the same thing, which is to love each other. And this brings us to what John Paul II called his personalistic norm in love and responsibility. The person is the kind of good towards which the only proper and adequate attitude is love. In other words, the only way you're supposed to be allowed to approach a person is love. The only attitude to have toward a person is love. Is I want what is absolutely best for you. And Adam and Eve did that. Well, then you get that funky line, the man and his wife were naked and not ashamed. Did you ever wonder about that? When I was a kid, my cousin used to say, well, Playboy magazine's okay because even the Bible says they're naked and not ashamed. And I said, there's something wrong with that. I don't know what, but I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to tell the whole world. The reason Adam and Eve could be naked and not ashamed was because John Paul II says the perfect beauty of their exterior reflected the perfect beauty of their interior. There was no rupture between the spiritual and the sensible. What you're seeing on the outside perfectly reflects the inside. They could be perfectly transparent. When you're naked, you don't have pockets, right? You can't hide anything. But Adam and Eve, that physical nakedness is indicative of a spiritual and an emotional nakedness where they had nothing to hide from each other. They had no hidden motivations. They had no, okay, I'm just being nice to you, but really I want this. No agenda. No intent to harm, no intent to use, no withheld information, nothing. That nakedness reflected a totality of trust between Adam and Eve when they could love each other perfectly. It was a gaze free of manipulation and domination. They had no reason to hide, no reason to protect each other because there was no possibility that the other's response would be anything but love. There was no possibility of use, no possibility of abuse. Now, this nakedness, this naked and not ashamed, is also a reference to sex. That they could be completely available to each other because, again, no possibility of use or abuse. Now, I studied the theology of the body under a brilliant Puerto Rican professor named Lorenzo Albacetti, and he always said that this is the street level of, he smoked too, so every time I imitate Albacetti, I go into this in class. It is my pro-life statement. The abortion Nazis don't like smoking, so I smoke. But he always said we were going to have 2 theology of the body classes, a stag class and one for the ladies. But he said that this is the street level of the theology of the body, that the bodies fit together. The male body makes no sense until you see it in relation to the female body. It's like, oh, okay. They fit together. And that physical complementarity of the male and female body is indicative of the deeper complementarity that we've been talking about the differences between men and women. Men and women have different strengths. Men and women's brains are different. On every level, physical, emotional, psychological, we have this complementarity that we make more sense together. And that male and female are meant to come together. John Paul II says that the body speaks the language of personal communion. And this is huge with John Paul II. Everything, and this is where he was a kind of a pioneer, and his pioneering kind of reached back, and he influenced Paul VI and Vatican II. Everything is about meaning. The meaning of the body. The body has a meaning. The body has a truth that is inherent in it and that we can't get around, that we can't change. And this indicativeness that the male and female body are meant to come together is the beginning of how we see that. So when the male and female give themselves to each other, this physical coming together, this physical giving of the body is also a deeper giving. That the total gift of self of marriage is made real through the gift of the body. In giving their bodies to each other, they aren't just giving their bodies to each other, or loaning their bodies to each other, as the case may be. They are giving themselves to each other in love. They are saying, I give myself to you completely, forever, to look out for what is best for you. That is the language. That's what John Paul II called the nuptial meaning of the body. Nuptial, marital. That the body has a marital meaning. And that in giving themselves to each other, they are speaking that language, that nuptial meaning of I give myself to you totally and completely and irrevocably in love. This is the heart of the theology of the body. It's the heart of the teaching. Sex speaks a language. It has an internal logic. It says, I give myself to you in a total, complete self-donation. This, if you go back to the classic categories of church teaching, church has always, since the time of Augustine, has taught that marriage has a unitive and a procreative end. Usually called the ends of marriage, the unitive and the procreative. This is the unitive. I give myself to you in love. I accept you as you are, and I give all of myself to you. Everything about it, everything about sex, the sexual expression between a husband and wife, is oriented to permanence. Now, here's where we start to get a little bit humane vitae-ish. What's God's first commandment to Adam and Eve? Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. It's a big world. There are only 2 people. There's a lot of space. And he wants them to fill it with creatures created for their own sake. Creatures destined for eternal life. These human persons created in the image and likeness of God that God wants to exist and loves and wants to live with him forever. He could do that any way he wanted, right? He's God. right? He could keep doing the clay thing, the rib things, whatever. He could use drones. There's all kinds of new technology. God chose to work through this act of self-donating love. This is real stuff. Like, he gives us a share in his most creative act, in his identity as creator. He doesn't just do it according to his own will. He allows us to participate. That's incredible. Scott Hahn has a line. He says that the love between a husband and wife is so real that 9 months later you have to give it a name. I love that. People say the Catholic Church says sex is dirty. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. God is there. And I really believe that this is as close as we get to God outside the Eucharist in this life, is to participate with him in creating new life. Now, in the end, the ultimate decision is in his hands. I remember this in Monsignor Albasetti's class as well, when he talked about the unit, the act and then conception. And he said that the act places us in the context where God can work. A does not cause B. Like, the sexual act itself does not cause babies. It places us in the context where God can choose to cause them. As he said, you can A all day long, and if God doesn't want B, B's not going to happen. We are cooperating with him, but we are the ones who create that context where it's possible. We are the ones who allow him in to create. There are physical realities to this too. We talk about how sex speaks a language of permanence. Women, any of you who have given birth are probably familiar with the hormone oxytocin. It's an incredibly strong hormone that causes you to be forgetful, decreases your ability to think rationally, causes a strong emotional attachment to form, and women's bodies produce a ton of it in labor, which is what made my sister walk around for 2 years saying, I loved my labor. And I said, were you there? Because I was, and no, you were really quite cranky. The same hormone is present in sexual activity and is produced in both men's and women's brains in sexual activity. This bonding hormone, this attaching hormone. Everything about sex, excuse me. Excuse me. Thank you. Merci. Everything about it, this nuptial meaning of the body, comes from God. We didn't make up this meaning. We just discover it, and we just respect it. Everything is about forever, about bonding, about permanence. So, this man and his wife give themselves to each other, and through that, they bring new life into the world. And they form what John Paul II calls the communion of persons. They were already a communion of persons as two, but the communion of persons grows. A group of people who live not for themselves, but for each other. Not in a communist way, like I live for the state, but in an individual way of for each other individual, for the image and likeness of God in every other individual. So, in marriage, a husband and wife aren't just giving themselves to each other, they are giving themselves to each other and to the new lives that could come. That self-gift goes beyond just those two. It's not just I give myself to you, but I give myself to you and any child that might result from this. This is why Humanae Vitae starts by talking about the important mission of transmitting human life. The munus is the word in Latin. This is encountering God himself in his most divine characteristic as creator. Beautiful, incredible. And then we messed it all up with sin, right? Everything was perfect in Eden. It's all great. They love each other perfectly. They trust each other perfectly. Then they eat the apple, or whatever it was. And what happens? Immediately Adam hides because he was naked. Why? Naked was not a problem a chapter ago. Suddenly naked's a problem. The body didn't change. It's the intentionality that changed. Before, the ethos and the ethic were one. Now the ethos and the ethic are split, and they've discovered lust. And we don't define lust as sexual attraction. We define lust as the will to use the other for my personal satisfaction without regard for what happens to them. That is lust, and that can be in any realm. It doesn't have to be the sexual realm. To see a person not as an end for themselves, but as means for me to get to my end. As the road that I can drive over to get where I want to go. Adam said, if I wasn't quite so worried about Eve, I could get more for me. And Eve was saying, if I wasn't quite so worried about Adam, I could get more for me. So now we can no longer have this naked and not ashamed thing because everybody feels the need to hide. First, Adam needs to hide because he's embarrassed that he's not loving her the way he's supposed to. Like, these thoughts are coming to his head that he wouldn't have to love her, that he could just use her. So he's embarrassed, so he hides. But he's also figured out that she's figured it out. So he has to hide from her because he doesn't trust her anymore. And they both have to hide from God. So before, the gaze between Adam and Eve was a gaze free of manipulation and domination. Now they've realized that manipulation and domination might be attractive options. And this changes everything. Lust is a violation of the personalistic norm, because the personalistic norm says the only appropriate response to a human person is love. But then John Paul II in Love and Responsibility also gave the personalistic norm in its negative aspect. Quote, "This norm in its negative aspect states that the person is the kind of good which does not admit of use and cannot be treated as an object of use, and as such the means to an end." A person is always supposed to be end, not means. And if you're reading that first chapter of Love and Responsibility on the analysis of the verb to use, that's what you're learning. Finally, I just flew the white flag and said, I agree, I believe you, you can never use another person. Can I please go on to the next chapter? John Paul II said the my of reciprocity, like you are mine, the my of reciprocity became a my of dominion. And that is wrong. You are mine to do with as I please. So they hide and they realize that the body is no longer a reliable sign. The body no longer necessarily, what the body is doing no longer necessarily indicates the intentionality of the person. Now the body remains good. That's not a question. Hiding the body is not because the body is now bad, it's because the body remains sacred, but it is vulnerable. And this is where shame enters the world. And I think shame is an important discussion that is a sense we've completely lost. John Paul II talks about shame in a positive light as the instinct to hide that which is sacred but needs to be protected. And we've completely lost that sense in this culture. If we don't talk about something, it must mean that there's something wrong with it. And that's where people got this impression that sex is dirty because we didn't talk about it. When really for generations, people didn't talk about the details of sex because it was sacred, because it was holy, because it was something set apart, set aside. And this is a sense we need to restore for our kids. Because they're naturally inclined to this. They're naturally inclined to, God built it into them to be uncomfortable talking about the details. And we're in a society that says, well, no, you just need to talk about it and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And we're never really that comfortable with it. I had a woman come up to me when I was giving a talk once, and she said, I teach 4th grade, and I'm teaching sex education. She said, I'm really uncomfortable talking about the details, and I know I have to get over it. I said, what do you mean you have to get over it? You're a sexually active woman in your 40s, and it's making you uncomfortable. How do you think a room full of 9-year-olds feel? To get this sense back that it's okay to not talk about it because it's good. That there are settings where it needs to be discussed. Parents need to discuss it with their children. But that discomfort with it is a good thing. That's what happened as a result of the fall. Before the fall, we wouldn't have that problem. Sex still has the same meaning. It still means I give myself to you forever, but we're just tempted to speak that language in a lie. to say, I give myself to you forever, when what we're really saying is, well, just for tonight. Or, maybe if you put out, I'll consider you for that movie. Or whatever. And when we speak that language in a lie, we are not loving, we are using. Now this was all in the second series of talks that John Paul II gave, and the scripture that he used over the whole thing was from the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard it said, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I tell you, any man who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, he was basing all the talks on that passage. And I remember this. I don't know if any of you do. I was in high school when he was giving these theology of the body talks. And I was obviously not paying attention. But there was one talk he gave that was so controversial that it made all the papers. And that was when he pointed out that Jesus didn't say, you have heard it said, thou shalt, any man who looks at a woman who is not his wife, lustfully. It just says, any man who looks at a woman lustfully, period. And John Paul II pointed out that husbands should not look at their wives lustfully. And the press got their hands on this and said, crazy Catholic Pope says that that married couples shouldn't be sexually attracted to each other. That's not what he was saying at all. Lust is the will to use another person, to see another person as just means to my end and not an end in themselves. And marriage is the last place that should exist. Marriage is the last place where a husband should look at his wife and say, I want to get sexual pleasure from you. I don't care what happens to you. I just want sexual pleasure. Marriage is the last place there should be any form of lust. Which brings us to contraception. Now, we talked a minute ago about the traditional teachings on the ends of marriage. The church always said that there's a unitive and a procreative and they can't be separated. And that's just it. Paul VI in Humanae Vitae spoke of two meanings. He still said the unitive and the procreative meaning. And I think he got that meaning, my hunch, from his friend Carol in Poland. Traditionally, the church said that the two ends are unitive and procreative, and the procreative is primary. The procreative, the main thing, the main point of marriage is to have children, and also, incidentally, for the spouses to support each other, and a remedy for concupiscence. Have you ever heard that phrase? It's a remedy for concupiscence. It's not very John Paul II-ish. Paul VI spoke of the two meanings. He didn't give either one primacy. He just spoke of the unitive meaning and the procreative meaning. And some people interpreted that as eliminating the primacy of the procreative. But he reiterated that they can't be separated. To which the generation of the 60s said, yeah, right. John Paul II took all this, the two meanings, the unitive and the procreative, to a whole new level. He talked about how there was an inseparable connection. Look at that. It thinks I've taken 6,000 steps. Just because I've been doing this. He said that the nuptial meaning of the body says that a husband and wife are giving themselves to each other in a total and complete self-donation, accepting you exactly as you are and giving myself exactly as I am. And he said the contraception changes that. Because when I accept you exactly as you are, that means accepting your fertility, because your fertility is part of who you are. And when I give myself to you exactly as I am, that includes my fertility, because my fertility is part of who I am. And accepting you means accepting that and loving accordingly. Contraception, on the other hand, says, I accept all of you except your fertility. Because you are fertile right now, that's not okay with me. I still want sexual access to your body, so we're going to have to change something so that your fertility can be removed and I can still have sexual access to your body. Now, John Paul II says that, going back to ends and means, given that it changes the language of I give myself to you and accept you as you are, John Paul II was very groundbreaking in this. He said, Contraception is not just a violation against the procreative aspect. Contraception is a violation against the unitive. Contraception is changing the nature of how I give myself to you and how you give yourself to me. It's withholding. It's changing something. And they really are inseparable. They're so inseparable that you can't break one without breaking the other. Now, I'm not married, so I tread lightly here because I have no personal experience in this. But in my years in this world, in this field, in speaking on chastity and moving around the NFP world, wives consistently, I'm sure you all in your NFP work, or your married couple work, or whatever work you're doing, many of you run across couples who used to contracept and then begin to use natural family planning. And so often the wives say, I felt used. And the husbands were clueless. Huh? But on some level, even if they didn't understand why, this need to chemically control their fertility to make them acceptable made them feel used. So the meaning of the unitive is more complete. I give myself to you and the new life that may result. Janet Smith, I'm sure you're all familiar with Janet, love Janet. One of my favorite lines, she always says, make a list of people you wouldn't mind fooling around with in the Bahamas for a weekend. Like, don't think about it too long, but that might be a relatively long list, right? Now make a list of people you want to bring a child into the world with. That's a much shorter list. The nuptial meaning of the body is the second, not the first. And contraception splits that apart and creates an enormous temptation to violate the personalistic norm. When there's no consequence, when there's no need to accept the child that comes forth as a result of this, your body becomes an instrument for me. It's so easy, the temptation becomes so great for the body just to become means to the end without thinking about what's best for you. I mean, we can't say that it follows 100% of the time because, then you'd be saying that infertile couples are necessarily using each other, and that's not necessarily the case. But the temptation when children are deliberately excluded, the temptation, the likelihood of violating the personalistic norm becomes much greater. Now, in Humanae Vitae, and in John Paul II as well, you hear a lot of discussion of recourse to the infertile time. That's what UNFP people teach. Recourse to the infertile time. RIT. I'll start calling it RIT. That is different. And Paul VI explains how it's different, saying that the generative processes in nature, blah, 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 it's one paragraph, it's natural law. I read it and I was like, that's not compelling. John Paul II said that in recourse to the infertile time, you are accepting the person exactly as they are and loving them accordingly. If it's okay, if it's a time when you could joyfully welcome a new life, then lovely. But if not, if the couple have prayerfully discerned, no, this is not the right time, there are issues that would preclude it being a good idea for us to conceive right now, they find another way to love each other. I love you exactly as you are, and your fertility is part of who you are, and right now we can't do that because of the reality of your fertility, so let me find a different way to love you. It's beautiful. It respects the unitive meaning and the procreative meaning. It all really makes sense. Now, the best known section of Humanae Vitae is where he warned, his warnings about what will happen in the world, about pornography, about lack of respect for women. He warned about governments using contraception to coerce, requiring contraception to coerce birth rates. Hello, China online too. He saw it all coming. It all starts in the discussion, in the majority report, the discussion at the time around Humanae Vitae was, well, a sincere couple who was prayed and discerned and who really want to do God's will, but because they have this difficulty or that difficulty, They are unable to recourse to the infertile time, so with prayer and discernment with their pastor, maybe it would be all right for them to turn to birth control. But see, it starts with that, and then it goes to, you think that the hippies at Lovestock were discerning? It's, yay, great, woo, now women have no argument because they can't say, I'm not going to do it because I don't want to get pregnant. You just say, here, take this pill. And then it moves into society. And then the child becomes a byproduct. Instead of being a loved and welcomed, and part of this equation becomes, I didn't sign on for that. I didn't want a kid. You got yourself pregnant. And that's where you get abortion. That's what people don't believe, but studies consistently show that higher contraception rates lead to higher abortion rates, not lower. Because in the brain and in the society and everywhere, the gulf is more complete between sex and the result, the natural result. And so there's more of this indignation that, what do you mean a baby? I don't want a baby. Well, you did the thing that puts you in the context for God to create a baby. So that's where we get abortion. That's where, if you look at our foster system, so many of these children are just byproducts. They were never intended. They were never prepared for. And this is what happens. You get a lack of respect. And then, once again, women become objects of use. You get the Me Too movement. Now, I want to conclude with, there's talk again now on the 50th anniversary. People are starting to say, well, it's the 50th anniversary of this wonderful document, and let's reverence and revere this wonderful document and read it closely to see if we can find any loopholes. Right? Isn't this a lot of what's going on? And it's the same thing. It's, pastoral, with pastoral accompaniment, and maybe there are couples who just can't because of their special circumstances, and maybe we need to pray with them, and the pastoral exceptions. So I want to close. I didn't do a lot of quotes from John Paul II because I think, as a rule, listening to a lot of quotes is kind of hard. But this quote I thought was worth it. I'm going to end with it. It's from John Paul II's Reflections on Humanae Vitae, which ties everything back together. Those who believe that the council and the encyclical do not sufficiently take into account the difficulties of concrete life do not understand the pastoral concern that stood at the origin of these documents. Pastoral concern means seeking the true good of man, promoting the values impressed by God in the human person. That is, it signifies applying the rule of understanding, which aims at the ever clearer discovery of God's plan for human love, in the certainty that the one and only true good of the human person consists in putting this divine plan into practice. In other words, the true good, the only true good, and that one and only true good was all italicized. The one and only true good of man is following the will of God, is being part of his plan, not being an exception because we feel sorry for him, because we believe that God's plan is best, because God knows us and God created us. So that's what true pastoral work is, and that's what you all are doing. And I want to thank you and applaud you for that, because I just flit around and give a talk every once in a while. You're in the trenches and you're making a big deal. Like the slideshow said, one family at a time, one couple at a time, one person at a time. If I can ever help you, let me know. I was going to bring books. My book Real Love is a good resource. They sell them somewhere else now, and I don't know how to buy them. I mean, I know how to buy them on Amazon, but I don't know how to buy them wholesale. So if get your hands on it, it would help. It was written in '96, so people say, oh, it's really old. We completely updated it in 2012, which is interesting because I dealt with every single issue that I knew of in 2012, every single issue that was on the radar. You read that book, there's not a mention of transgenderism anywhere, because it did not appear until Obergefell. But that's another story. So, yes, thank you very much for including me in this lovely evening. Thank you for all the work you do, and I will keep you in my prayers. Please keep me in yours.